What's up, everybody? Time to put our tinfoil hats on because it's conspiracy theory rambling time. Going to be looking at the Minotaur's chapter master Asterion Moloc. At least that's how I'm going to pronounce his name. Not really sure how you pronounce his name. But going to be taking a look at that guy because, the Minotaurs are cool. Their chapter master is pretty neat. And in light of stuff that has come out with the Custodian Guard Codex for 40k, it got me thinking about Asterion Moloc some more, and this is not a unique theory to my own, meaning I didn't make it up, I'm sure, first even or anything like that, but I haven't looked it up online. I'm sure if you did a Google search or whatever, you'd find it, but, people talking about this. But my theory is Asterion Moloc here, and it's a conspiracy theory, because I feel like, while this is really neat and interesting, I don't think GW would necessarily dive down the rabbit hole like this. But with that said, tinfoil hat is on, ready to go. So my theory is he is not an Astartes, but rather a Custodes masquerading as a chapter master of the Astartes, particularly an eye of the Emperor Custodes. So that's the theory, and I'm going to go into why a bit. It's going to be a little long-winded here. I'm not going to try and keep it within my typical 15 minutes. If it goes over, it goes over. So firstly, I have to understand the Minotaur's chapter a little bit, as well as what the eyes of the Emperor are. So first off, the Minotaur's chapter. Forgel did a fantastic job retconning this and a few other chapters during the Badab War. And the way they did this one was they basically kept its initial inception the same, with the gaudy color scheme and the tactics and everything. Then they kind of faded away into obscurity, and then when they resurfaced again, they were completely changed in look and in capability, the way they do things and everything like that. Meaning there was a period of, you could say, upheaval or just restructuring of the chapter in some way, shape, or form. Now this is all hidden behind binding oaths of suppression, you could say, binding edicts locking away their history from the High Lords of Terra themselves. This means that nobody really can gain access to this information. We have some rumors of potential chimeric gene seed. We don't know if this means that they've always had chimeric gene seed, or that some experimental chimeric gene seed design was implemented for the creation or recreation of Minotaurs underneath the High Lords of Terra kind of purview. But what we do know is that the chapter that has come from it is very ruthless, kind of rebels in the fight that they do, very well equipped, always moves as one massive force. They don't break down into their companies and send their companies elsewhere. They all move as one massive chapter force, and they're very well supplied, like I mentioned. We also know that they are typically at the beck and call of the High Lords of Terra. They are most often given orders direct from the High Lords of Terra, as opposed to relaying orders from planetary governors, and as opposed to being autonomous. Now the chapter is still a Space Marine chapter. It's still functioning relatively autonomously, but they get a lot of direct requests and orders, you could say, from the High Lords of Terra, which is very suspicious. And it seems like they were created with the express purpose of being the militant arm of the High Lords of Terra when it comes to bringing in renegade chapters to justice, you could say, or destroying renegade chapters that are basically fallen to the forces of either chaos or just to being rebel tyrants and stuff like that. That's the reason they were at the Badab War, for example. So, knowing that, this would definitely be something that the Custodes would take an interest in. Now, this is before they became fully active as overtly active, sending stuff out to fight. They've done that in secret over all the millennia. But they definitely have the authority and the capability of finding out whatever they want to find out. They have the ultimate authority, you could say. They answer only to the Emperor himself on his golden throne. Nobody else can order them around, only send polite requests for aid, and their information network is absolute. They basically can find out anything, you could say. So it stands to reason that they would have found out about this whole Minotaur situation. And given the delicate nature of one or multiple High Lords being involved in this and the creation of this chapter, the Custodes decided to forego the typical purging that they would do, you could say, and instead did something a bit more underhanded, or with a bit more subterfuge to it, and that is to infiltrate the ranks with one of their own. Now remember, Custodes and Astartes are two separate subspecies of transhuman, if you want to think about it that way. They're apples and oranges. They may, and only in this case they look kind of similar on the outside. Custodes tend to be a bit bigger, but by and large they both look like super soldiered, awesomeness, clad in really good armor and equipped with the best weapons. But their training is different, their mindsets are different, their physiology is different, everything about them is different. So, with that said, infiltrating the Space Marine ranks with a pristine Custodes might not be the best call. So that's where the Eyes of the Emperor come in. And what the Eyes of the Emperor are Custodes who are too injured or were grievously injured and unable to just recover from it without needing some type of surgery for cybernetic enhancement and augmentation and bionic replacements. Things that will either slow them down or make them not perfect in their attacks or whatever. A fraction of a second difference is all it takes for Custodes to be viewed not fit for duty. And that's what the Eyes of the Emperor are. They're Custodes that are just not up to the standards of what would be needed to be active duty Custodes to defend the Emperor himself. As a result, they turn in their war gear, but they're still of use. They're still more than capable. And they go out and they act literally as the Eyes of the Emperor. They are part of the information network now of the Custodes. They will use their own considerable might and training and tactics to take care of situations. They will also call in things that they feel need the Custodes' direct intervention and so forth, and thus strengthen their intelligence network. Well, one of these guys could definitely be used to infiltrate a Space Marine rank, you could say. And that's where we're at with this theory, is that an Eye of the Emperor Custodes, during the massive restructuring of the Minotaurs chapter that more than likely happened, was able to be infiltrated in to lead the chapter. Now, whether they silenced and got rid of the real Asterion Moloc and this guy took his place, or they kind of made up this Astartes known as Asterion Moloc and fabricated records and whatnot and details and did whatever they had to do to get it to work, is not really known. But whatever the case is, they were successful in infiltrating the chapter ranks of the Minotaurs with their own Custodes brother as a chapter master. Now this is important because of how involved the High Lords of Terror are. This is a danger potentially to the Emperor. All it takes is one rogue order from a renegade High Lord of Terra, or renegades, if there's multiple involved, and you can have a very dangerous weapon on the loose in the form of an entire Space Marine chapter like that. So having an Eye of the Emperor there is a nice little buffer to kind of keep that from happening, but still act as if it's a pure Astartes chapter, because outside of the chapter master here, the rest of the Minotaurs are Astartes. So with that said, that's all well and good, but what evidence is there to support that Asterion Moloc may be more than meets the eye? Well, we have his original entry of stuff. We know about the Eyes of the Emperor and how they are typically injured Custodes that need bionic enhancement and augmentation to be brought back to some form of fighting shape, right? Not perfect, but close to it, but not good enough for Custodes active duty. So we have to keep that in mind. Plus, we got to look at the Custodes mindset. The Custodes mindset for viewing threats to the Emperor is one that outsiders would definitely view as paranoid, but is necessary and effective for what they do. Keep the concept of paranoia in mind. So, Asterion Moloc, he's described as being a brutal fighter, a brutal combatant, and a really logical, tactical master of siegecraft. He is also somebody who has extensive cybernetic reconstruction to his body from all the wounds he supposedly has taken. This helps with the whole Eye of the Emperor thing. They're massively, you could have a one that had to get a lot of cybernetic surgery and have it fit right in there. On top of that, you could have the cybernetic surgery be extensive to the point where, the Astartes, if it wasn't Astartes, wouldn't have gene seed or certain organs anymore. So, given that Custodes don't have gene seed, don't have the same physiology as an Astartes, having one with extensive cybernetic replacements and rebuilding helps that out a bit. If anybody gets a little too nosy about the biology of your commander. Well, he's extensively cybernetically rebuilt. What do you expect? So you have that. Plus, it's said in the fluff that Asterion Moloc has been reported dead on multiple occasions, but always comes back to the fore. This led to one of the theories that Asterion Moloc is a title that is taken by each new chapter master and perhaps engramic type of memories encoded into the mind or whatever, which is a theory, of course. But part of that is the cybernetic enhancements, making it hard to kill something that is a big part machine, right? And on top of that, being that we're talking about the theory, the tinfoil hat theory here, that he's a Custodes and I the Emperor Custodes, he's got the Custodes physiology plus the cybernetic enhancements, which for Custodes are probably of a higher degree of quality, allowing him to survive grievous injury where Astartes just simply could not. So you have that going on for him. Obviously, Custodes are very well trained for combat, for strategy, and doing everything else. Now, that being said, Astartes are no slouches either, and chapter masters certainly aren't any slouches. But, having this brutal commander, this brutal fighter, this master strategist, and siegecraft and everything, it's not only a Custodes capability, but it definitely isn't hurting the Custodes theory at all. On top of that, he wields the Black Spear. Now, the Black Spear is a interesting weapon because it's thought to be a Custodes weapon from either their vaults or from somewhere. Now, given that it's not your standard Guardian Spear, it's something special, a bit more exotic, I really doubt that the Custodes would hand it over to an Astartes at all. If they're going to hand over anything, and it's a big if, it'll be the Guardian Spear. So, the fact that he's got this Black Spear, this artifact of a Custodes, an origin supposedly heavily implied, well, who better to have it than a Custodes to wield it? So, there's that. It's probably one of the weaker things that I've mentioned, but it's still worth mentioning because it's part of his initial fluff from the onset. Also, he's in Terminator armor, Artificer Tartaros Terminator armor, which is cool because it's really rare, really ornate, very nice, but it's also Terminator armor, so it's bigger, it's bulkier. It can help hide his somewhat larger frame that Custodes tend to have typically in comparison to Astartes. And lastly, he's viewed as aloof. He doesn't go to war councils. He sends his Reclusiarch in his place to be kind of his emissary and the voice of the chapter for him. And that could be just because, well, the Reclusiarch is an Astartes to Astartes conversation and acting on whatnot is a lot better than having a Custodes there. Even though he's acting like an Astartes, it could just give a weird vibe, who knows. But maybe there's a pesky, overly inquisitor there with psychic capabilities, or a librarian who's just too nosy for their own good. So having the Reclusiarch there means there's no way for them to go, he doesn't seem Astartes, via magic or something. On top of that aloof nature, you have his paranoid tendency. He's got a reputation for being paranoid. Now, Custodes, as I mentioned, the way they view all threats, or all potential threats, even the most loyal thing, is a very paranoid mindset to outsiders. This is I the Emperor Custodes leading an Astartes chapter for this theory, right? So he would have that same mindset. You don't just get rid of that programming, if you will, overnight. So the way in which he conducts himself, conducts his chapter, conducts routines, would probably seem a bit paranoid to outsiders because of that fact. So you have that going on, which is kind of neat. All this together really does kind of lead to a lot of signs, if you're willing to dive deep enough down that rabbit hole with your tinfoil hat on, to pointing at a non-Astartes commander of the Minotaurs. It would make a lot of sense, being again that buffer from keeping anything potentially disastrous happening with any renegade High Lord of Terra requests, right? If they were requested to all of a sudden go and sack the Ultramarines Sanctum of Space, well, that makes no sense, especially with Guilliman around and everything now. If they were ordered to go and siege Titan, that would be a big what's going on here type of situation. So there is a nice little buffer there in the form of that Custodes leadership that would be in place with the Chapter Master. He would obviously have constant secretive communication with the Custodes to kind of relay that information. They can then act upon it. Asterion and Moloc can act upon it, and so forth. So with that said, not much else to really say in regards to this theory. Aside from the fact that, being a master of siegecraft and having that aloof nature, that kind of cold viewpoint on things, is a bit easier to have be a resolute thing and add to his dark legend when you're not sharing a bond of brotherhood with those you lead. And he's not. Astartes have a bond of brotherhood that's completely different from Custodes. There's a lot closer knit there. Squads that fight together can fight together for decades, if not centuries, only replacing those that get lost in battle, if that even ever happens to be the case, right? So they develop a deep sense of brotherhood. They don their armor and check their war gear and do everything in kind of a brotherhood mentality. The Custodes are very singular. They have a kinship with each other, but everything gets done kind of on its own because they're constantly rotated in and out of groups to do different situations. So that mindset would just make it that much easier to have the cold, calculating siegecraft tactical mentality of measuring each drop of blood for success. Chapter Masters can do that. There are particularly cold Chapter Masters out there that are Astartes, obviously, but it just makes it that much easier when you have no ties at all. So you have that going on. Outside of that, what are your thoughts on this theory? It's just a theory, a conspiracy theory here, of course, because at the end of the day, you could very well just be a really pissed off, violent Chapter Master that is Astartes. But just looking at all the things they made mention of and having the Eye of the Emperor fluff concept, putting the two together with the very fact that the Black Spear was, from the very inception of it being a thing, rumored heavily to be Custodes in origin, that's in its fluff, and you have the makings of a potential Eye of the Emperor in a position of power to help out the Custodes and, overall, by being that buffer, being that leader of this very capable chapter that is known for bringing renegade forces to heel. Asterion Moloc is known to have personally slayed numerous Orc warlords, Chaos Lords, renegade chapter masters, so it would make sense in a bit that it would be a Custodes, just for the martial prowess that Custodes have innately. Now, chapter masters, of course, are very capable, don't get me wrong, but that martial prowess plus the fact that they view everything at spear's length and they wouldn't really have any gumption of slaughtering whatever they had to defend the Emperor, all of that just makes it feel a little bit of an easier pill to swallow in the form of Asterion Moloc. But he could very well just be an Astartes, a really awesome Astartes, just like the Carcharodon's Astra Chapter Master is a very awesome Astartes. So, anyways, that's it. Thanks for sticking through it. Share your thoughts in the comments section, and until next time, take it easy.